The only sound in my mother's hospital room was the quiet, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. It was a sound I'd come to hate over the last 48 hours, a relentless clock ticking away the seconds we had left. I sat on the edge of the bed, my uniform still stiff from the 17-hour flight, and held her hand. It felt like a bird's wing in mine, impossibly light, the skin cool and dry. The doctors had been blunt, their words delivered with a clinical precision I recognized from my own military briefings. Aplastic anemia. Bone marrow failure. The transfusions weren't working anymore. I'd been trained to receive bad news without flinching, to compartmentalize and execute the mission. But this wasn't a mission. This was my mom. "It's okay, Mom. You can rest now," I whispered, my throat so tight the words were barely a breath. Her eyelids fluttered, opening to reveal eyes that were cloudy and tired, but still hers. She was the strongest person I knew, a woman who worked 2 jobs to raise us after Dad died, who never once let us see her break. And now she was trying to summon a weak smile, as if she were the one who needed to comfort me. I hated it. I hated the injustice of seeing her tethered to IV drips, her strength leached away into the sterile white sheets. I squeezed her hand, trying to pour my own strength into her. "You don't have to fight anymore," I said, the lie catching in my throat. "I'll be okay, I promise." Of course, I wouldn't be. I wasn't okay at all. I was terrified. The soldier in me was offline, the daughter in me was shattering into a million pieces. Her eyes drifted past me, toward the door. "David," she rasped, the name a fragile question. Is he okay? He worries so." A familiar cold ache settled in my chest. Even now, even at the very end, her worry was for him. He was the son who stayed, the successful banker. I was the one who left, the daughter who chose a life of dust and discipline a world away. I was the strong one. Just then, the door opened and David walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. The quiet sanctuary of the room was instantly violated by his hushed, urgent tones about portfolios. He gave Mom a quick, distracted smile, the kind you give a child when you're in the middle of an important conversation. She watched him with a flicker of pride in her tired eyes, and in that moment, I felt completely and utterly invisible. He ended his call and the silence rushed back in, now heavy with his presence. He walked over to the other side of the bed, his expensive suit looking alien in the sterile room. "I've spoken with the legal team," he said, his voice low and businesslike, pulling a brochure for a hospice facility from his briefcase. "We need to be practical, Kate. The doctors agree. It's time to discuss withdrawing life support and making her comfortable." He said it so calmly, as if he were discussing a corporate merger. He was managing her death. He looked at me, his gaze laced with a condescending pity that made my blood run cold. "You've been gone a long time. You might not understand, but this is the compassionate choice. Let's not make it more complicated." There it was again. Complicated. My grief was an obstacle. My love was an inconvenience. Before I could find my voice, his phone buzzed again. He shot me an apologetic look. "I have to take this. 1 minute." He stepped out into the hall, leaving me alone with the beeping monitor and that glossy brochure. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I kissed Mom's forehead, her skin cooled against my lips, and walked out of the room, needing to escape the rhythm of her dying. I was standing by the nurse's station, trying to will my heart rate back to normal, when I heard them. 2 nurses, speaking in the low, gossipy tones people use when they think no one is listening. The words snagged in the air, cutting through my fog. "Looks exactly like that old man Thorne, over in Havenwood. Swear to God they could be twins." My head snapped up. "I know, right?" the other one replied, shuffling a chart. "It's uncanny. If only they could find a healthy relative like him for a marrow transplant. Might give her a real chance." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Marrow transplant. The words were a physical shock, an electric jolt to my system. Havenwood. That was the small, forgotten town where Mom grew up before she was adopted. My mind, my soldier's mind, started connecting the intel. A man who looked just like her. A town from her past. A transplant. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a target. My pulse was thundering in my ears. I'd spent 2 days forcing myself to accept the inevitable. Now, in 2 whispered sentences, I had a sliver of hope so fierce it felt like a weapon. My dad, the quiet man who'd raised me, always said, "When you face a wall, you either dig in or walk away. But if you walk away, don't you come back crying about what you missed." David came back down the hall, phone gone, his managerial face back in place. "Okay, so about the paperwork. I need her file." I cut him off, my voice harder than I intended. He blinked. "What for?" "Kate, don't do this. There's no miracle cure. Stop playing the hero and accept it." "Give me the authorization," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." He saw the sergeant, not the sister. He scribbled a signature on a release form without another word. In the records office, I slapped the form and my military ID on the counter. The clerk, intimidated, handed over the worn manila folder in under a minute. I found an empty waiting room and tore the folder open. My hands trembled as I flipped past pages of medical jargon, not knowing what I was looking for, but trusting I'd know it when I saw it. And then I did. On the patient history form, under Family Medical History, were the names of the people I knew as my grandparents. But beside them, a single, handwritten note in faded blue ink that blew my world apart. Adopted. Biological origins, unknown. I stared at the words until they blurred. The nurses weren't gossiping. They were pointing the way. My mother had another family, a blood family. And somewhere out there was a man who shared her face. In that moment, staring at those 2 words, I felt completely alone. My brother thought I was crazy, my mother was fading, and I was holding on to a sliver of hope that felt like a fantasy. If you believe this one small clue was worth fighting for, show your support by hitting that like button. Let me know I'm not fighting alone by commenting, "Fight, Kate, fight," below. And make sure you subscribe because my battle was just beginning. Grief and shock receded, replaced by something cold, hard, and clear. A mission. I wasn't here to say goodbye. I was here to fight. I met David in the sprawling concrete parking garage of the hospital. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and damp cement. He stood beside my old Ford F-150, his arms crossed, his face a mask of frustration. "You can't be serious, Kate," he started before I was even within arm's reach. "You're actually leaving? Mom is in there, dying, and you're going to chase some fairy tale?" His voice echoed in the cavernous space, sharp and accusatory. I kept walking, unlocked the driver's side door, and tossed my duffel bag onto the passenger seat. I turned to face him, the worn leather of the truck's seat at my back. "I'm not chasing a fairy tale, David. I'm following a lead." "A lead?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "A snippet of gossip from 2 nurses? That's your brilliant military strategy? You always do this. You always run away when things get real. You run off to the army, you run off to Germany, and now you're running off to God knows where instead of facing your actual responsibility." His words were designed to wound, to pin me with the guilt he felt I deserved. For a second, they found their mark. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. At his perfect suit, his perfect life, his perfect inability to see beyond the edge of his own tidy world. And the guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "My responsibility is to not give up," I said, my voice as steady as the concrete floor beneath my boots. "That's something Mom taught both of us. Maybe you forgot." I didn't wait for a reply. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the old truck rumbled to life. As I pulled out of the parking space, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing there, a solitary figure shrinking into the background. He was a symbol of the world I was leaving behind, a world that had already decided my mother's fate. The highway was a black ribbon unfurling into the night. I pushed the F-150 west on Interstate 80, the miles dissolving under my tires. The darkness outside was absolute, pierced only by the twin beams of my headlights. I found a classic rock station on the radio, letting the familiar chords of Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen fill the cab, a bulwark against the silence and the doubt that threatened to creep in. To stay awake, I drank bitter black coffee from a thermos and chewed on dry energy bars that tasted like sawdust. Survival school training had taught me how to function on empty. When you're lost, one of my instructors used to say, don't just stand there waiting for rescue, you make your own damn path. And that's what I was doing. The landscape of western Pennsylvania scrolled past my window like a ghost. The skeletons of long-dead steel mills clawed at the night sky, their broken windows like vacant eyes. I drove through small towns that seemed to be holding their breath, their main streets lined with boarded-up storefronts and flickering traffic lights that blinked for no one. This was Mom's world, the one she'd told me stories about. A place of industry and pride that had rusted over, left behind by a future that had no use for it. With every mile, the resolve in my gut hardened. But fear was a quiet passenger, sitting beside me in the dark. Fear that I was wasting precious time. Fear that I was chasing a phantom down a dead-end road while back in that sterile hospital room, the clock was ticking. I pushed the accelerator a little harder. Dawn broke as I rolled into Havenwood, painting the gray sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange. The town was nestled in a curve of the Monongahela River, a collection of old brick buildings clinging to the hillside. It felt forgotten, a place where time had slowed to a crawl. I saw a church with a rusted steeple, a VFW hall with a peeling American flag, and a diner called the Steel Skillet, its neon sign buzzing weakly in the morning light. That was my first stop. The moment I opened the door, the smell of strong coffee, bacon, and years of fried potatoes hit me. It was the smell of every small-town diner in America. I slid onto a stool at the counter, the vinyl cracked beneath me. A waitress with a magnificent beehive hairdo and a name tag that read, Marge, placed a thick ceramic mug in front of me. "What can I get for you, hun?" "Just coffee for now, thanks," I said. I let her pour, then took a sip. It was hot and strong. "Actually, I'm looking for someone, an older gentleman, might live around here." Marge leaned against the counter, her curiosity piqued. "This is a small town, hun. Pretty much know everyone. What's he look like?" I described my mother's face from memory, the strong jawline, the high cheekbones, the piercing green eyes. I just gave her the male version. She squinted, tapping a long red fingernail against her chin. Her eyes narrowed in recognition. "Sounds a lot like Jasper Thorne," she said slowly. "Lives alone up on the North Hill. A bit of a recluse, keeps to himself. Be careful with that one. He's prickly." She scribbled a set of crude directions on a napkin. A name, a location, the first tangible piece of my mission. I paid for the coffee, left a generous tip, and walked back out into the cool morning air. I sat in my truck for a long time, the engine off, the napkin with the directions resting on my lap. I pulled the worn photo of my mom from my wallet, the one from last Christmas. She was smiling, but her eyes already looked tired. Was I about to disturb the life of a stranger, a man who might want nothing to do with this? Did I have the right to burst into his world and ask for the impossible? The doubt I was so good at bearing under layers of discipline and duty began to surface. It was a cold, familiar feeling. The voice that told me I wasn't enough, that I was making a mistake. I closed my eyes, forcing the voice down. I pictured my mother's face in the hospital bed. I heard the beep of the monitor, and I knew. I had no other choice. I had to see this through. No matter what I found at the top of that hill, I would never forgive myself if I didn't try. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before a mission briefing. I started the engine. The ghost could be real. And I was going to find him. The dirt road Marge had described was more like a suggestion than a path. It was a rutted, muddy track that snaked up the hill, forcing my F-150 into four-wheel drive. The truck groaned in protest as I navigated the treacherous terrain, branches scraping against the side panels like claws. This wasn't a road for visitors. This was a road designed to keep the world out. The homestead appeared abruptly at the top of the rise. It wasn't a peaceful farmhouse. It was a fortress of solitude. The two-story house was clad in weathered clapboard siding that had faded to the color of bone, and the porch sagged on one end as if sighing under the weight of years. A rusted-out tractor sat in the overgrown yard like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. It was a place of stark, haunting beauty, steeped in decay. I parked the truck and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. My military training kicked in. Recon the area. No barking dog. No signs of life, except for a thin curl of gray smoke whispering from the stone chimney. This was a place where a man could disappear. I swung myself out of the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. The sound felt like a violation, an intrusion into a long-held quiet. I walked toward the house, my senses on high alert. I felt like I was crossing into hostile territory, a feeling I knew all too well. As a logistics sergeant, my job wasn't to fight, but to enter places where fighting had just happened or was about to. This felt like the latter. I was halfway up the rickety porch steps when the front door creaked open. A man filled the doorway, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette against the darkness within. And my breath caught in my throat. Every rehearsed line, every carefully planned approach I'd formulated during the drive evaporated from my mind. It was my mother's face. Not a vague resemblance. It was her face, carved onto a man's frame. The same strong jaw, the same high cheekbones, the same startling green eyes. But his were framed by a web of deep-set wrinkles and held a cold, guarded look that I had never seen on her. This face had weathered a different kind of storm. He held a small hatchet in one hand, its blade clean but worn. He held it loosely, naturally, as if it were an extension of his arm. His gaze swept over me, from my dusty combat boots to my tired face. A quick, dismissive assessment. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, the sound of an engine that hadn't been started in a long time. It held none of my mother's warmth. It was heavy with the weight of solitude and suspicion. It took me a second to find my own voice. My training took over, falling back on protocol when emotion threatened to overwhelm. Direct, to the point. "My name is Sergeant Kate Willis," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm looking for Jasper Thorne." His eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't confirm or deny. He just waited. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo of my mom, holding it out to him. "This woman is my mother, Eleanor Willis. She's dying." He glanced at the picture, his expression unreadable. A flicker of something, recognition, surprise, crossed his features for a fraction of a second before vanishing, replaced by a wall of indifference. "So?" he rasped. "Don't know her." The blunt dismissal was like a physical blow, but I couldn't stop now. I'd come too far. "She was adopted," I pressed on, my voice tight with urgency. "She needs a bone marrow transplant. People in town, they said you look like her." A dry, mirthless chuckle escaped his throat. It was a harsh, cracking sound, utterly devoid of humor. "Rumors? You drove all the way up this damn hill because of a rumor." He shook his head, a look of weary contempt on his face. "Get out of here. I don't have anything for you." He turned, ready to shut the door and erase me from his world. Panic seized me. This was my one shot, my only hope, and it was about to be sealed behind a wooden door. "She's your twin sister." The words burst out of me, raw and desperate, my voice cracking under the strain. That stopped him. His hand froze on the doorknob. He didn't turn around, but his entire body went rigid. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the tall, dead grass. He was listening. I took a step forward and carefully placed the photograph on the weathered porch railing, propping it against a post. "Her name is Eleanor," I said softly, speaking to his back. "She lived a good life, she's strong, and she doesn't deserve to die like this." With that, I had nothing left. I had laid my last card on the table and lost. A wave of profound failure washed over me. I turned and walked back toward my truck, each step heavier than the last. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded like a funeral march. I was almost to the truck, my hand reaching for the door handle, when his voice cut through the silence behind me, a low, hesitant rasp. "Did she ever mention me?" I stopped, my back still to him. He remained in the shadows of the doorway, a silhouette of a man I didn't know, with the face of the woman I loved more than anything. It wasn't an acceptance, it wasn't an invitation, but it was a crack in the wall. His question hung in the cold air between us, a fragile bridge across a 40-year chasm. I turned back from my truck and faced him. He was still half hidden in the shadow of the doorway, but the hard, defensive line of his shoulders had softened. He gestured vaguely with the hatchet toward the interior of the house. It wasn't a warm invitation, but it wasn't a dismissal either. I took it. The inside of the house was Spartan, meticulously clean, but cold. Everything was functional, not comfortable. A cast iron stove radiated a low heat in the main room, with firewood stacked neatly against one wall. It felt less like a home and more like a long-term survival shelter. We sat in two stiff wooden chairs near the hearth, the unlit fireplace a dark, empty mouth between us. He reached for the photo I'd left on the porch railing and stared at it for a long time, his thumb gently tracing the edge of the picture. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wind outside. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still fixed on my mother's face. "I'm adopted too," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Never went looking. Figured if someone throws you away once, there's no point in digging through the trash to find them." The words were raw, coded in a lifetime of hurt. And in that moment, I felt an unexpected surge of empathy. His feeling of being discarded by his birth parents resonated with my own quiet, lifelong feeling of being an outsider in my own family. David was the son who fit. I was the daughter who had to be accommodated. Jasper and I were strangers, but we were bound by the same invisible scar. "My mother never knew," I said quietly. "Her adoptive parents never told her. She's lived her whole life believing she was an only child." I explained everything then. The aplastic anemia, the failed transfusions, the ticking clock. I told him about the nurse's conversation, the long-shot hope that had propelled me here. He listened without interruption, his gaze intense. The hostility in his eyes slowly dissolved, replaced by a deep, troubled confusion. He wasn't looking at an intruder anymore. He was looking at a puzzle he didn't know existed. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. "If she's my sister, then why were we separated?" It was the question that had started to form in my own mind, a dark, unsettling mystery that went far beyond a simple family tragedy. We had no answers. We sat there in silence again, two strangers connected by a secret neither of us understood. Finally, he stood up and walked over to a heavy, dark wood trunk in the corner of the room. The hinges groaned as he lifted the lid. He reached inside and pulled out a small metal lockbox, the kind people use to store important papers. He placed it on the rough-hewn table between us and opened it with a small key. Inside, nestled among a few other documents, was a folded, yellowed piece of paper, his birth certificate. He slid it across the table toward me. My breath hitched. Birthplace, Havenwood General Hospital. And then, the date. It was identical to my mother's. The abstract theory, the wild hope based on a rumor, solidified into a stark, irrefutable fact right there on that piece of paper. They were twins. Jasper watched my face, then looked down at the certificate as if seeing it for the first time. It was no longer just a document proving his own existence. It was proof of a life he'd never known, a sister who had lived a parallel existence just a few hundred miles away. It was the ghost of a shared past. He once told me he came out here to the woods to live deliberately, quoting a line from a book by Thoreau. But looking at him now, I realized you can't live deliberately when you don't even know the first chapter of your own story. He looked up from the paper and met my eyes. In them, I saw a reflection of the same stubborn resilience I saw in myself, the same refusal to be broken. The wall he had built around himself for 40 years had finally crumbled. "I'll get tested," he said, his voice firm, resolute. The confusion was gone, replaced by a purpose I hadn't heard before. "I'm not doing this for a mother who abandoned me. I'm doing this for the sister I never got to know." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And I'm doing this for you. No one should have to fight a war like this alone." Tears burned the back of my eyes. It was more than an agreement. It was an acceptance. It was a soldier acknowledging another soldier on the field of battle. For the first time since I'd landed on American soil, for the first time in this whole nightmare, I didn't feel completely, utterly alone. The drive back to the hospital was the complete opposite of my journey to Havenwood. The cab of the F-150 was no longer a lonely capsule hurtling through the darkness. It was quiet, but it was a comfortable shared silence, punctuated by the low rumble of the engine. We stopped at a roadside diner halfway there. The place smelled of coffee and fried onions. He ordered a cheeseburger with fries, and I got a chicken salad. We ate without much conversation, but the small talk we made felt monumental. He asked about my time in the service, and I asked about his farm. We were trading small, ordinary pieces of our separate lives, laying the first stones of a bridge across the vast emptiness that had separated them. He was no longer a stranger. He was my mother's brother. He was my uncle. When we pulled into the hospital parking garage, I looked at the gruff, solitary man sitting beside me. 24 hours ago, he was a ghost, a name on a napkin. Now, he was family. A strange, fractured family, pieced together from secrets and sorrow, but mine nonetheless. And for the first time, I felt like we might actually have a chance to win. The call from the lab came the next morning. "It's a perfect match," the coordinator said, her voice bright and clinical. "A 1 in a million chance, Sergeant. We can schedule the transplant." A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I hung up the phone and told Jasper. For a moment, we just stood there in the sterile hospital hallway, two strangers bound by blood, sharing a silent victory. We had done it. We had found the miracle. But the relief was fleeting, like a flash of sunlight before a storm. As we sat in the hospital cafeteria, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and disinfectant, the question that had been haunting us returned, heavier than before. Why? Why would two twins be separated at birth only to develop the same rare bone marrow disease nearly 40 years later? It defied logic. It defied coincidence. Jasper stirred his black coffee, his gaze distant. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Growing up, there was a street near the old Blackwood plant they used to call Widow's Row." I looked at him, my senses sharpening. Why? Because the men all died young. Cancers, mostly. Breathing problems. The company doctors always had a reason. Smoked too much. Bad genes. Just bad luck. He took a slow sip of coffee. And the kids? A lot of the kids were sickly. My best friend from grade school, Timmy, he was gone before he turned 12. Leukemia. They called it a tragedy. Another run of bad luck. He looked at me, his green eyes dark with a lifetime of unanswered questions. No one ever dared point a finger at Blackwood. In that valley, Orion Blackwood wasn't just a businessman. He was God. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My soldier's intuition, the gut feeling that had kept me alive on more than one dangerous supply run, was screaming at me. This was not bad luck. This was a pattern. I left Jasper to begin his preliminary tests and drove the 2 hours back to Havenwood. My mission had changed. I wasn't just looking for a donor anymore, I was hunting for the truth. The Havenwood Public Library was a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and dust. In the basement, a friendly librarian showed me to a clunky, outdated microfilm machine. I requested the archives for the Havenwood Chronicle from 1980 to 1990. For hours, I scrolled through the ghostly, black-and-white images of the town's past. The squeal of the machine, the only sound in the dim room. I scanned past headlines about high school football games and bake sales. My eyes trained to find something else. I was looking for the dead. And I found them. Not in big front-page stories, but in the small, quiet corners of the paper. The obituary section. One by one, I started writing them down in my notebook. Robert Miller, 42, blood disorder. Susan Pirelli, 38, leukemia. Michael O'Connell, 9, complications from aplastic anemia. Dozens of names. dozens of lives cut short. I cross-referenced the names with the addresses listed, and then I saw it. The pattern. It wasn't just a random cluster of tragedies. It was a map. Almost every single one of them had lived within a 2-mile radius downstream from Blackwood Industries. I bought a local map at a gas station and went back to the cheap motel room I'd rented. I spread the map out on the worn bedspread and, with a red marker, I began to plot the data points. Each red dot was a death, an obituary, a life. Slowly, a terrifying picture emerged. The red dots formed a dense, sickening cluster that hugged the curve of the Monongahela River, starting just below the factory and spreading out like a disease. My mother's illness wasn't random. Her adoption wasn't a simple family matter. It was an escape. Our biological parents must have known something. They must have seen what was happening to their neighbors, their friends. And they'd tried to get at least one of their children out, away from the poisoned land, away from the contaminated water. A cold, surgical rage took hold of me. This wasn't a family tragedy anymore. This was a mass casualty event. A quiet, slow-motion massacre that had been happening for decades, covered up by money, power, and the town's forced silence. The motto of my Special Forces unit flashed in my mind: De oppresso libere, to free the oppressed. My mission wasn't just about saving my mother anymore. It was about them, all of them. I drove to Blackwood Industries. This time, I wasn't a daughter searching for family. I was a soldier on a reconnaissance mission. I parked my F-150 on a ridge overlooking the sprawling complex, a safe distance away. I pulled out my military-grade binoculars and began to observe. The place was a fortress. I saw security patrols, chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. As dusk settled over the valley, I watched unmarked tanker trucks roll in and out of a rear gate. I saw piles of rusted, leaking 55-gallon drums stacked carelessly in a back lot hidden from the main road. The whole operation screamed guilty. And there, flying high above the main administrative building, was an American flag, flapping proudly in the breeze right next to the sleek, corporate logo of Blackwood Industries. The irony was so profound it made me sick. My enemy was no longer an invisible disease inside my mother's body. It had a name and a face: Orion Blackwood. And he was down there, behind that fence, breathing clean air while an entire town slowly died for his profits. The objective had been clarified. Saving Mom was just the first battle. The real war was just beginning. The moment I started asking questions in Havenwood, the town changed. It was a subtle shift, but unmistakable. Conversations would stop when I walked into the diner. Friendly smiles would tighten into polite, closed expressions. Doors that had been open were now shut. This town wasn't just quiet, it was terrified. It was living under a decades-long siege of silence. The first direct sign came 2 nights later. I was in my dingy, roadside motel room, the map of Havenwood spread out on the lumpy bed, the red dots of the dead staring up at me. Through the thin curtains, I noticed a car parked across the street under a flickering street lamp. A black sedan with tinted windows and no plates. It wasn't there when I checked in. And it didn't move for 3 hours. My training kicked in. I was being watched. My presence was no longer a secret. The enemy knew my position. I didn't panic. Panic gets you killed. But a cold, professional alertness settled over me. I checked the flimsy lock on my door, wedged a chair under the knob, and slept in my clothes. The war had gone from a strategic overview to tactical reality. The next morning, they sent their first message. I walked out into the misty dawn to find my F-150 listing to one side. The rear driver's side tire was completely flat. It wasn't a nail or a random piece of glass. It was a clean, deep slice through the sidewall, a professional cut. And on the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a dirty, handmade rag doll with button eyes and tangled yarn for hair. The message was crude, but clear. It was dripping with misogynistic contempt. You're just a little girl playing in a man's world. This game is too big for you. Go home. A hot surge of anger, hotter than any fear, coursed through me. They hadn't just threatened me, they had dismissed me. They looked at a master sergeant in the United States Army and saw nothing but a woman to be intimidated with a child's toy. General Patton once said, "Accept the challenges so that you can feel the exhilaration of victory." Right then, I accepted their challenge. They had underestimated me, and that was going to be their fatal mistake. But their next move was far more sinister. It came later that day. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered, my voice flat. "Willis." A man's voice, low and calm, spoke on the other end. It was a voice that was used to giving orders and being obeyed. "Sergeant Willis," he said, the title sounding like a mockery. "We know what you're doing. We know what you're digging for." I stayed silent, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "And we know about a man named Jasper Thorne," the voice continued, smooth as poison. "It would be a terrible shame if something were to happen to your mother's only donation source, wouldn't it?" My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs. This wasn't about slashed tires or creepy dolls anymore. They weren't just threatening me. They were targeting Jasper. They were threatening the fragile, one-in-a-million hope that was keeping my mother alive. They had crossed a line. Orion Blackwood wasn't just a corporate criminal hiding financial records. He was a monster who would threaten an innocent man's life to protect his secrets. In that moment, the mission became crystal clear. This wasn't a fight I could win alone by digging through archives. I needed to go on the offensive. I made a decision. If they were going to treat this like a war, I would bring the fight to their command post. The Blackwood Industries headquarters was a gleaming tower of glass and steel that rose out of the decaying town like an insult. It was a monument to the power that had bled Havenwood dry. I walked through the automatic glass doors, my combat boots silent on the polished marble floor. I was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, but I walked like I was in formation. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced corporate smile, tried to stop me. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Orion Blackwood." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me." It took 10 minutes of my polite, unmovable refusal to leave and a tense conversation she had on her headset. But eventually, a security guard escorted me to the top floor. Orion Blackwood's office was bigger than my first apartment. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a godlike view of the valley below. His valley, his town. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a portrait of success and power in a perfectly tailored Italian suit. He looked more like a senator than a man who buried his toxic secrets in the ground. He smiled, a slick, predatory smile that didn't reach his cold, gray eyes. "Sergeant Willis, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I didn't sit in the chair he offered. I stood in the middle of his expensive rug and went straight for the objective. "I know what you did," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the vast office. "To this town, to my mother." The smile vanished from his face. He stood up slowly, a predator uncoiling, and walked around the desk to stand in front of me. He was taller than I expected, imposing. "You're making some very serious accusations, Sergeant," he murmured, his voice now a silky threat. "Do you have any proof?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, the scent of expensive cologne filling the air around me. "Because if you don't, I suggest you get back in that pathetic old truck of yours and drive away. Disappear. Before you cause a tragedy that even a decorated soldier like yourself can't salvage." It was a declaration of war. And I stood my ground, looked him straight in his dead gray eyes, and let the silence hang in the air as my answer. The battle lines had just been drawn. Walking out of Orion Blackwood's glass tower, the cold threat he'd delivered still ringing in my ears, I knew one thing for certain. I was out of my league. The basic military principle echoed in my mind. Never fight a battle alone if you don't have to. Blackwood had resources, power, and an entire town silenced by fear. I had a righteous fury and a rental car. It was time to build a squad. My first call was to Jasper. I drove to a quiet spot overlooking the river and told him everything, holding nothing back. The veiled threat, the coldness in Blackwood's eyes, the explicit mention of him as the donation source. I expected him to be scared, to tell me to back off. Instead, his voice came back over the line, hard as the Pennsylvania bedrock. "So that's his move," he growled. "Good. Now we know what kind of snake we're dealing with." There was no fear, only a hardened resolve. "I've been running from the world my whole life, Kate, hiding up on this hill. I'm done running." Then he gave me our first piece of actionable intel. "There's a man you need to see, Silas Croft. He was a maintenance supervisor at the plant for 30 years. Quick, quiet-like after his wife, Mary, died of leukemia. If anyone knows where Blackwood buried his sins, it's Silas. And I mean that literally." I found Silas Croft at the Havenwood Cemetery. It was a peaceful, somber place with rows of white marble headstones standing under the shade of ancient oak trees. He was a stooped man with silver hair and shoulders permanently hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. He was kneeling, carefully tending to the grass around a simple granite stone that read, "Mary Croft, beloved wife." I approached slowly, not wanting to intrude. He looked up as my shadow fell over him, his eyes wary. I introduced myself and explained why I was there. He sighed, a long, bitter sound, and went back to pulling a weed. "I tried, you know," he said, his voice raspy with disuse. "After Mary passed, I went to the sheriff, I went to the town council. They're all on Blackwood's payroll, every last one of them." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a profound, weary sadness. "He's a monster, young lady. And you can't kill a monster like that." I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince him with patriotic speeches or calls to duty. I simply knelt down on the grass beside him and looked at the name carved into the stone. "My mother," I said softly, "is dying of the same thing that took your wife. She might not make it, but I can't let her life, and her death, mean nothing." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle between us in the quiet cemetery. "And I don't think you want Mary's death to mean nothing either." He stopped weeding. His weathered hand, stained with dirt, rested on top of the headstone. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he nodded slowly, a single, decisive movement. The weight on his shoulders seemed to lift, just a fraction. He had found a reason to stand up again. Silas led me back to his small, tidy house. In his dusty, cramped basement, surrounded by old tools and boxes of memories, he walked over to a gray metal locker. He fumbled with a combination lock, the clicks echoing in the silence, and swung the door open. What was inside wasn't just evidence. It was a treasure chest of truth. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. Inside, in meticulous handwriting, were 15 years of secrets. Dates of chemical spills, measurements of toxins released into the river, and direct orders from management to falsify reports. Tucked between the pages were grainy, candid photographs of barrels being illegally buried in the dead of night. "I kept it all," Silas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've held on to this for 15 years, just waiting. Waiting for someone brave enough, or maybe just crazy enough, to actually use it. This ledger was the silver bullet we needed. But I knew that evidence this explosive was useless if fired from the wrong gun. The local system was corrupted. We needed to go over their heads. We needed federal firepower. Back in Germany, I'd worked with a liaison from the Environmental Protection Agency on a base contamination issue. He owed me a favor. A few calls later, I had a name, Serafina Reyes, a senior investigator in the EPA's Philadelphia regional office. Her reputation was legendary, tough, incorruptible, and she hated corporate polluters with a passion. I drove through the night, leaving the haunted hills of Havenwood behind for the concrete canyons of Philadelphia. I arrived at the federal building at 8 a.m. with no appointment. I told the receptionist I was here to see Agent Reyes about an imminent public health crisis. She told me to wait. So, I waited. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the lobby for 6 hours. I watched government employees come and go. I refused to move, refused to be put off. I was a soldier on a mission, and I was not leaving this building without my objective. Finally, just after 2 p.m., a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared. "You've got 10 minutes, Sergeant," Serafina Reyes said. In her office, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed Silas Croft's leather-bound ledger on her desk. "This isn't just an environmental violation, Agent Reyes," I said, my voice steady. "This is a multi-decade mass casualty event. It's mass murder, paid for by corporate profits. And that is my evidence." My 10 minutes turned into 2 hours. As she turned the pages, her expression shifted from professional skepticism to focused intensity, and then to a cold, controlled fury. When she finally closed the ledger, she looked at me, and I saw a fellow warrior. She had her target. We had just formed an alliance, a small team of broken people who were tired of being quiet. A ghost from the past, a grieving husband, and a soldier daughter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. If you've ever felt like you were the only one willing to stand up and fight, let me know in the comments by simply writing the word "together." Give this story a like to show your support for our small team, because we were about to go up against a giant. When I walked out of that federal building and into the late afternoon sun, I finally had a powerful ally on my side. A federal investigation was officially underway. Agent Reyes laid it out for me over a secure line, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "The ledger is a smoking gun, Sergeant, but it's a gun that was fired 15 years ago. To get a warrant that will let my team storm Blackwood's castle and arrest him, I need something current, something undeniable. Proof of an ongoing crime." Silas Croft, sitting with me in my motel room, pointed a trembling finger at a spot on our map. "The old limestone quarry," he rasped. "North of town. They shut it down in the late 90s. I always suspected. I heard trucks going up there at night, but I could never prove it." It was a catch-22. The EPA couldn't get a warrant without evidence, and they couldn't get evidence without a warrant to search the private property. The legal path was a dead end. That left only one other path, the one that wasn't legal. Jasper and I had to go in. We had to get that proof ourselves. My motel room became a makeshift tactical operations center. I pulled up satellite imagery from Google Earth on my laptop, the abandoned quarry appearing as a pale, ugly scar on the green landscape. My military logistics training kicked in, and I began to map out a plan of infiltration. "We'll approach from the west," I said, pointing to the screen. "The satellite shows a steep cliff face here. The security fence is likely weakest along this edge. They'll expect a threat from the main road, not from a direct vertical approach." Jasper, leaning over my shoulder, nodded in agreement. His knowledge of the local terrain was invaluable. "There's an old hunter's trail that leads to the base of that cliff," he said, tracing a faint line with his finger. "Barely visible. No one's used it in years." The plan was simple, which meant it was also incredibly dangerous. We would use the cover of darkness, moving in during the 2 a.m. security shift change. That would give us a 15-minute window. 15 minutes to get in, document whatever was there with my phone's camera, and get out without being seen. The stakes were absolute. If we were caught, it wasn't just a trespassing charge. It would give Blackwood the warning he needed to bury his secrets forever, and my mom's last hope would be buried with them. The hours leading up to the operation were the longest of my life. The air in the small room was thick with unspoken tension. For dinner, I made us peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on white bread. A meal so childishly simple, it felt absurd given what we were about to do. We ate in silence, sitting on the edge of the lumpy motel beds. Later that night, I stepped outside to make one last call. I dialed David's number. His voice was clipped, impatient. "What is it, Kate?" "How's Mom?" "She's stable. The doctor scheduled the transplant for the day after tomorrow." "Where are you? Still playing detective in that backwoods town?" I ignored the jab. There was no time for anger, no energy for another fight. "David, just take care of her," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Tell her I love her." I hung up before he could reply, cutting the connection to the life I was risking, the world I might not get back to. When I returned to the room, Jasper was cleaning his old hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of the stone the only sound. He looked up at me, his green eyes searching my face. "You scared?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I sat down on the bed, the springs groaning in protest. I took a deep breath and gave him the honest answer. "Terrified. I admitted. But I'm more scared of doing nothing. He nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on his face. He put the knife down and looked at me, really looked at me. My sister, he said, the words coming out with a strange, new weight. She raised one hell of a daughter. It was the first time he'd called her that. My sister. In that quiet, tense moment, the final piece of our strange family clicked into place. We were no longer just allies. We were blood. Before we left, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought of a verse Mom used to recite to me when I was a child, scared of the dark. It was from the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. We moved under the sliver of a crescent moon. Dressed in dark clothing, we were just two more shadows in a night full of them. Jasper led us down the hunter's trail, his steps sure-footed and silent. We reached the chain-link fence at the base of the cliff and cut through it with a pair of bolt cutters. We were ghosts, slipping through the perimeter, unheard and unseen. The quarry opened up before us, a vast man-made canyon, eerily silent under the stars. And then we saw it. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a few barrels. It was a chemical graveyard. Hundreds of rusted 55-gallon drums were strewn across the quarry floor. Some had been dumped haphazardly, others stacked in precarious piles. A dark, viscous liquid seeped from many of them, forming iridescent pools on the ground that shimmered sickly in the faint moonlight. The air smelled sharp, acrid, like poison. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I started taking pictures, the quiet click of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I took wide shots, close-ups of the leaking barrels, the faded warning labels. This was it. This was the undeniable proof Reyes needed. As I was capturing a final video, a low rumble broke the silence. The sound of a heavy truck engine. My head snapped up. Headlights cut through the darkness at the far end of the quarry. We ducked behind a large pile of rocks, my heart hammering against my ribs. We could hear voices, two men talking. "Boss wants this whole place cleared out by the weekend," one of them said, his voice carrying in the still night air. "Get the bulldozer over here tomorrow. We're burying everything." My blood ran cold. They weren't just hiding the evidence. They were about to destroy it. I fumbled with my phone, my fingers hitting the record button for the audio. We had proof of the crime, and now, proof of the cover-up. Just then, the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the quarry floor. It moved methodically, searching. And then it stopped, the bright white circle of light landing directly on the rocks we were hiding behind. The world narrowed to two separate, simultaneous battles, each one holding a life in the balance. One was fought in the sterile silence of a hospital, the other in the cold darkness of a Pennsylvania night. And I was trapped between them, a helpless commander watching both fronts unfold at once. After Jasper and I escaped the quarry with the digital evidence, I'd sent the encrypted file to Agent Reyes. The wheels of federal justice, once set in motion, moved with terrifying speed. Now, less than 24 hours later, everything was coming to a head. My first front was here, in the harshly lit waiting room outside the transplant unit. Jasper, looking pale but resolute after his marrow donation, sat beside me. A few hours earlier, we had watched them wheel Mom into the sterile isolation room. She was weak, but her eyes, when they met mine, were not afraid. They were proud. My brother, David, paced nervously by the window, for once stripped of his corporate armor, looking like nothing more than a scared son. Behind a sheet of glass, the procedure began. A nurse hung a small bag of crimson liquid on an IV pole. Jasper's healthy stem cells. A river of life, ready to flow from a brother she never knew into the sister he'd just found. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, my heart aching with a hope so fierce it felt like pain. I wasn't praying to God. I was praying to her. "Fight, Mom." I cleared the path. "Now you just have to walk it." My phone buzzed. A single text from Agent Reyes. "We're moving in." The second front had just opened. Hundreds of miles away, under the cover of darkness, a convoy of black, unmarked SUVs sliced through the sleeping streets of Havenwood. No sirens, no flashing lights. Agents from the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI moved with silent, professional efficiency. Based on the evidence from the quarry, a federal judge had signed a no-knock warrant in the middle of the night. They hit the Blackwood Industries headquarters like a thunderclap. The glass doors of the lobby shattered inward. Security guards, hired to intimidate locals, found themselves face down on the marble floor, neutralized by men who moved with the fluid lethality of ghosts. Orion Blackwood was in his penthouse office, frantically trying to wipe his servers when his oak doors splintered off their hinges. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and outrage, as a team of federal agents swarmed in. "You have no right," he bellowed, his voice accustomed to a world that always bent to his will. "Do you know who I am?" Agent Serafina Reyes stepped forward, her face grim, a signed warrant in her hand. "You're Orion Blackwood," she said, her voice cutting through his rage. "And you are under arrest for endangerment of a community, conspiracy, and a list of felonies so long we'll be here until morning." My world began to cross-cut, two realities playing out at once, my mind flashing between them. A close-up on the heart monitor in Mom's room. The beep, fragile but steady. Beep, beep, beep. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs closing around Orion Blackwood's wrists. A doctor in the transplant unit giving a thumbs up through the glass. Her body isn't rejecting it. The cells are taking. FBI agents carrying out boxes of documents, entire server towers. Decades of lies, now evidence. David finally broke. The sight of Mom, so vulnerable behind the glass, had shattered his carefully constructed composure. He sank into the chair next to me, his head in his hands, and for the first time since we were children, he cried. His shoulders shook with ragged, heartbroken sobs. He reached out and grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you, Kate," he whispered, his voice choked. "Thank you for not giving up." David's tears of relief and regret, a dam of denial finally breaking. Blackwood, his face contorted in a mask of fury and defeat, being frog-marched out of his glass tower and into the flashing lights of news cameras that had suddenly appeared. From his vantage point, he could see the EPA hazmat teams, already swarming the factory grounds below. As the agents pushed him into the back of a black SUV, his eyes, for a split second, seemed to look right at me, as if he could see me through the miles. And in my mind's eye, I met his gaze, not with hatred, but with the cold, quiet finality of a mission completed. My oath as a soldier was to protect my country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Orion Blackwood was a domestic enemy, and he had just been neutralized. In the hospital waiting room, the local news channel broke in with a special report. The image on the corner television was unmistakable. Orion Blackwood, in handcuffs. A stunned silence fell over the waiting room. Everyone, the families waiting for news, the nurses on their break, stopped and stared. I looked at the screen, at the downfall of a tyrant. Then I turned and looked at the closed door of my mother's room, where a quiet miracle was taking place. The two battles were over. We had won. On both fronts. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel vengeful joy. What I felt was a profound, bone-deep sense of relief, as if a weight I had been carrying on my shoulders my entire life had finally been lifted. I had done it, not just for Mom, but for Jasper, for Silas Croft and his Mary, and for every silent victim whose name was written in a forgotten obituary. The tears that had threatened all week finally came. They streamed down my face, hot and unchecked. But for the first time, they weren't tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of release. 6 months later, autumn came to Pennsylvania. It painted the rolling hills in brilliant strokes of crimson and gold, the air crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The world felt like it was breathing again. And so was my mother. Eleanor Willis was home. The road to recovery had been long and arduous, a quiet, grueling battle fought day by day. But she had won. Her hair was growing back, a soft silver fuzz that caught the afternoon light. She sat on the old porch swing, a thick woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders, looking out at the small garden she'd always loved. Beside her sat Jasper. He had moved into the guest room a few months back. Just until she's back on her feet, he'd claimed. But we all knew he was home to stay. They didn't talk much, those two. They didn't need to. They would just sit together for hours, sharing a silence that felt more profound than any conversation. It was as if their twin souls, separated for a lifetime, were finally catching up. His quiet presence was a better medicine than any prescription. The two halves of a whole, finally pieced together. The empire of Orion Blackwood, on the other hand, had crumbled to dust. Armed with the evidence from Silas's ledger and the quarry, dozens of families from Havenwood had come forward. A massive class action lawsuit was underway, and the town that had been silenced by fear for so long had finally found its voice. I was there for Blackwood's final sentencing. I didn't go for revenge or to gloat. I went to bear witness, to close the final chapter of that dark story. He was found guilty on all counts: racketeering, conspiracy, hundreds of violations of the Clean Water Act, and 27 counts of manslaughter. The judge handed him a sentence of life in prison, no possibility of parole. As they led him away in handcuffs, his expensive suit now rumpled and ill-fitting, his eyes met mine across the crowded courtroom. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a hollow, empty void. Justice hadn't been won with a weapon, but with the truth, and it was just as final. The most profound change, however, was in my brother. The shock of nearly losing our mother, coupled with the revelation of my unlikely quest, had cracked the perfect corporate shell he'd built around himself. The David who came over for Sunday dinner now was not the same man who had tried to hand me hospice brochures. He'd show up not with his briefcase, but with Mom's favorite cherry pie from a local bakery. He wouldn't talk about the stock market. He'd sit and listen, truly listen, as Mom and Jasper haltingly shared fragmented memories of a childhood they never had. One Sunday evening, the four of us sat around the dinner table. It was a simple meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden. The air was filled not with tension, but with easy laughter. David was telling a story about a disastrous fishing trip he'd taken as a kid, and Mom was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Jasper just watched her, a small, rare smile on his face. I looked around the table at these people. My quiet, resilient mother, reborn. My gruff, solitary uncle, finally home. My brother, finally present. This was my family. A strange and fractured thing, rebuilt from the wreckage of tragedy, but held together by blood and forgiveness, and a stubborn, unyielding love. A few weeks later, it was time for me to leave. My extended leave was over, and my unit was waiting. My mission here was complete. The day before I left, Jasper and I took a walk through the woods behind his old homestead, which he'd started calling our farm. The autumn leaves crunched under our boots. "You'll be back?" he asked, not looking at me. "It's my home, isn't it?" I smiled. He stopped and turned to me. "Damn right it is," he said. And then he did something that surprised us both. He pulled me into a rough, awkward hug. It was the hug of a man who wasn't used to showing affection, but it was one of the most honest things I'd ever felt. I had saved my mother, but in doing so, I had found a part of my own history, an anchor to a past I never knew I had. The next morning, as I drove away, I didn't feel sad. I felt whole. The war was over, but for my family, the journey was just beginning. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother standing on the porch, Jasper at her side. She was waving. In her garden, a row of late-season sunflowers stood tall, their heavy heads turned, as they always do, toward the rising sun. I thought of something Helen Keller once wrote: "Keep your face to the sunshine, and you cannot see the shadow." The shadows of the past were still there, but we were no longer looking at them. We were facing the light. The road ahead was clear, and the sky was wide open. My war is over, but the biggest lesson wasn't just about the fight. It was about what comes after. It taught me that family, whether it's the one you're born into or the one you find along the way, is the ultimate source of our strength. It's what gives us the courage to face the darkness and find the dawn. I'd be honored if you shared in the comments one word that describes where you find your own strength. Thank you for walking this road with me. For more stories about the resilience of the human spirit, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's next.